Hey, family. Today, we will bring you a romantic love story. So let's get started. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any meaningful stories. Lena Harper stood at the sink, her hands red from cold water. Dirty dishes piled high, the greasy smell from the diner clinging to her fingers. The neon light overhead flickered, as if reminding her that even the light in this kitchen was unreliable. Lena glanced at the wall clock. Nearly 10 p. Nearly 10 p.m. Her shift was supposed to end 2 hours ago, but the boss had kept her late to clean up after a busy party. A little extra tip, he'd said, but Lena knew it wouldn't even cover a bottle of cough syrup for her mother. She untied her apron, retied her dark brown hair that had come loose, and hurried out of the diner. The night wind in Willow Creek was bitter, cutting through Lena's thin jacket. She walked quickly down the dirt road toward home, her heart heavy. The Harper family's small house loomed in the darkness, a weathered wooden shack with chipped roof tiles and windows patched with tape. It was all that remained after her father left 10 years ago, abandoning her mother, Lena, her sister, and a debt that could never be paid off. Inside, the faint smell of antiseptic mixed with musty air. Ellen Harper lay on an armchair in the living room, eyes closed, breathing faintly. A thin blanket draped over her, not enough to hide her frail frame. Lena knelt, gently adjusting the blanket, her heart aching as she saw her mother wasting away. Ellen's lung disease had worsened since last winter, and the cost of medicine was like pouring salt into the sea. Lena turned to the corner of the room, where her sister, Mia, sat at a small wooden table. At 10 years old, Mia's clear eyes held worry as she scribbled homework under the flickering light of an oil lamp. "I'm back," Lena whispered, forcing a smile. Mia looked up and ran to hug her. "Mom was coughing all evening," the girl said, her voice trembling. Lena stroked her hair, hiding her despair. "It'll be okay," she said, though she didn't believe her own words. That night, Lena couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, staring at the dark road leading into town. Numbers danced in her mind. Hospital bills, rent, the loan from Carl, Willow Creek's notorious creditor. Carl wasn't the patient type. Last week, he'd shown up with 2 burly men, banging on the door and leaving a note with a new debt figure, $15,000. "Interest breeds interest," he'd sneered. "Can't pay? Get ready to live in a barn." The next morning, as Lena brewed coffee, a loud, insistent knock startled her. The mug nearly slipped from her hand. Mia, pulling on her coat for school, looked at Lena with fear. Lena took a deep breath, opened the door, bracing for Carl. But it wasn't him. A middle-aged man with a ruddy face stood there, grinning slyly. It was Jimmy, Carl's lackey. "Harper, where's the money?" Jimmy growled, tossing a stack of papers onto the floor. Lena picked them up, her hands shaking as she saw the debt now at $18,000. I need more time," she said, her voice faltering. Jimmy laughed, the sound cutting into her heart like a knife. "Time? You think this is a game? 1 more week, or I'll burn this house to ashes." When Jimmy left, Lena slammed the door, leaning against the wall as tears welled up. Mia stood in the corner, clutching her school bag, whispering, "Lena, are we going to be okay?" Lena wiped her eyes, pulling her sister close. "I promise, Mia, I'll find a way." But deep down, she knew she had no way. The diner job barely covered food and cheap medicine. Sell the house. It was her mother's only legacy in Mia's childhood home. Lena couldn't lose it. That afternoon, after returning from the market, a sleek black car parked in front of the house. A woman stepped out, stern-faced, wearing a long gray coat, her silver hair neatly pinned. She knocked, her gaze sharp, but her voice calm and firm. "Miss Lena Harper?" she asked. Lena nodded, wary. "I'm Margaret. I'm here with a proposal." Lena let Margaret in, though her gut churned with suspicion. The woman sat, declined a glass of water, and got to the point. "I represent a man who wants to marry you. If you agree, your family's debts will be paid. Your mother will receive treatment at the best hospital, and your sister will get a scholarship for higher education." Lena froze, as if hearing a fairy tale. Marry? Who? Why me? She asked, her voice shaky. Margaret gave a faint smile, but didn't answer directly. He's a private man, not one for show. Just know he can change your life. There's one condition. For the first 6 months after the wedding, you cannot leave his house. Margaret's words hit Lena like a stone into a still lake. She wanted to laugh, to call it a cruel joke, but the woman's serious eyes silenced her. Why should I trust you? Lena asked, trying to sound calm. Margaret pulled a check from her bag and slid it across. The number took Lena's breath away. $50,000, enough to clear the debt and get her mother into a hospital immediately. You have 2 days to decide, Margaret said, standing. But I advise you, don't let this chance slip. Not everyone is chosen. Then she left, leaving Lena with a check and a storm of emotions. Lena looked at her mother, still asleep in the armchair, then out the window where Mia played in the yard. Her heart tore in two. That night, Lena lay on her small bed, staring at the stained ceiling. Marry a stranger? Live like a prisoner for 6 months? The thought made her shudder. But then Carl's face loomed in her mind. He wouldn't stop. He'd take the house, Mia's future, maybe even her mother's life. Lena gripped the blanket, tears falling silently. She didn't want to sell her freedom, but the cost of poverty was too high. Maybe she had no other choice. The next morning, Lena called the number on Margaret's card. I'll do it, she said, her voice flat. On the other end, Margaret replied, Good, prepare yourself. The wedding is this weekend. Lena stood before a mirror in the small room of the Willow Creek Church, her hands gripping the hem of a borrowed wedding dress. The ivory gown, slightly loose at the shoulders, was a gift from Nancy, the town's only seamstress. Consider it my blessing, Nancy had said, but her eyes were full of pity. Lena studied her reflection. Dark brown hair, neatly pinned, deep blue eyes shimmering with unease. She didn't feel like a bride. She felt like a lamb headed for slaughter. The church bell tolled, slow and heavy, as if foreshadowing something grim. Lena took a deep breath, tried to shake the suffocating feeling. Today was her wedding day, but there were no friends, no celebration, not even a smile. Her mother, Ellen, was too weak to attend, and Mia was being watched by Nancy. Lena was alone, stepping into a foggy future with a man she'd never met. Margaret, the enigmatic woman who'd offered the marriage proposal, appeared at the door. She wore a gray suit, her gaze as sharp as ever. It's time, she said, her voice devoid of emotion. Lena nodded, following her into the hallway. Each step felt heavier, her old shoes clacking against the wooden floor. She wondered who this man was. A pauper? A sick man? Or just a lonely soul buying a wife with money? Whatever he was, Lena had no way back. Inside the church, the air was chillingly cold. The wooden pews sat empty, save for a few townsfolk scattered about. Mostly busybodies eager to witness the tragedy of the poor girl. Lena walked in, her eyes scanning the room. At the end of the aisle near the altar stood her groom, Qu'il. He sat in a wheelchair, hands resting stiffly on his lap, his face shadowed by a low-brimmed fedora. Lena's heart pounded. She couldn't see his face clearly, but the silence radiating from him sent a shiver down her spine. The pastor began the ceremony, his voice droning like an old hymn. Lena stood beside Eric, a few steps away, yet it felt like an ocean separated them. He didn't look up, didn't glance at her, didn't utter a word. When the pastor called for the ring exchange, Margaret stepped forward, placing a simple silver band in Lena's hand. She slipped it onto her finger, then, trembling, placed the other ring on Eric's. His hand was ice-cold, unresponsive. Lena stole a glance and caught his eyes, gray, piercing, like a storm held back. She quickly looked away, her heart racing. I pronounce you husband and wife, the pastor concluded. But no one clapped. A few whispers rose from the onlookers. Poor girl, married to a cripple like that, an old woman muttered. Heard he's got nothing but that old house on the outskirts, another chimed in. Lena bit her lip, tried to block out their words. She knew they were right. She traded her freedom for a loveless marriage with a man who seemed to have no need for her. The ceremony ended swiftly. Eric wheeled himself out first, silent as ever. Lena followed, feeling like a ghost. Outside the church, a black car waited. Margaret gestured for Lena to get in, while two men helped Eric into the back seat. The drive to their new home was silent. Lena stared out the window, watching Willow Creek's hills pass by in the twilight. She wondered if she was making the biggest mistake of her life. Eric's home, or rather, mansion, sat at the edge of town, hidden behind towering pines. It was old but vast, with moss-covered stone walls and towering windows. Lena stepped inside, her wedding dress brushing the cold stone floor. The air felt heavy, as if time had stopped years ago. An older woman, likely a housekeeper, led Lena to a second-floor bedroom. "This is your room," she said, leaving without further explanation. Lena changed out of the wedding dress, slipping back into her old clothes. She sat on the bed's edge, staring at the silver ring on her finger. It was too loose, slipping past her knuckle, as if to remind her she didn't belong here. She wondered where Eric was. Would he speak to her? Or was this her life now? A shadow wife in a strange house? That night, a knock came at the door. Lena opened it to find Eric in his wheelchair, facing her for the first time since the ceremony. He'd removed his hat, revealing an angular face, thick brows, and disheveled black hair. He was handsome, Lena had to admit, but it was a cold beauty, like a marble statue. "We need to set some things straight," he said, his voice low and dry. Lena nodded, stepping aside as he wheeled in. Eric stopped in the middle of the room, his eyes fixed on her. Not like a husband's, but like someone appraising an object. "We're married on paper," he said, each word sharp as a blade. "I don't need affection, I don't need care, and I definitely don't need love. You're here for a deal, and I expect you to respect it." Lena felt heat rush to her face. She'd sacrificed her freedom, left her mother and Mia to be part of this charade. And he dared speak as if she'd begged for it. "You think I wanted this?" She snapped, her voice shaking with anger. "I'm here for my family, not for you." Eric's brow furrowed, as if her words had struck something in him. But then he turned his wheelchair, rolling out without another word. "Go to sleep," he said before closing the door. "Tomorrow you'll learn the rules of this house." The door slammed shut, leaving Lena in silence. She sank on a bed, tears falling quietly. This was her wedding night. No flowers, no kiss, just a cold declaration from the man now her husband. She hugged herself, trying to ward off the chill creeping into her heart. She told herself to be strong, for her mother, for Mia. But deep down, Lena knew the next 6 months would be the greatest challenge of her life. Lena woke in the unfamiliar room, pale sunlight filtering through heavy curtains, casting faint streaks across the wooden floor. The steady ticking of a grandfather clock echoed somewhere in the mansion, like the heartbeat of a living thing. A week had passed since the cold wedding, and Lena still felt like an unwelcome guest in Eric Cole's home. The mansion was vast, with endless corridors and locked rooms, but lacked warmth. It was a labyrinth, and Lena was trapped inside. She sat up, smoothing her tangled hair, and glanced at the silver ring on her finger. It remained loose, a reminder that she didn't truly belong here. Lena pulled on an old sweater and jeans, stepping out of the room. The hallway was silent, her footsteps echoing. Portraits hung on the walls, strangers with somber eyes that seemed to follow her. Lena shivered, tugging her sweater tighter. Downstairs, Clara, the elderly housekeeper, was dusting the living room. She was the only one in the house who spoke to Lena, though in clipped sentences. "Breakfast is on the table," Clara said without looking up. Lena nodded, entering the dining room. A plate of toast and a cold cup of coffee waited. No sign of Eric. He was rarely around, except for the rare moments she glimpsed him in his study at the end of the hall. That door was always closed, and Lena had never been invited in. She sat, nibbling the toast, her thoughts drifting to her mother and Mia. Before leaving home, Lena had used Margaret's money to pay off Carl and get her mother into a hospital. Mia was staying with Nancy, who promised to care for her until Lena returned. 6 months, Lena told herself. Endure 6 months in this house, and she'd be free, her family safe. But the thought didn't ease the loneliness crushing her. After breakfast, Lena decided to explore the mansion. Clara had said she could go anywhere except Eric's study and the basement. Lena had no intention of breaking rules, but curiosity was starting to gnaw at her. This house held too many secrets. She began in the second-floor library, a vast room with towering bookshelves. Old, leather-bound books, many in Latin, sat covered in dust. Lena pulled one out, but its yellowed pages held nothing remarkable. As she returned it, she noticed a small painting hanging crookedly on the wall, a landscape, but its frame was unusually heavy. Lena touched it, and a faint click sounded. The wall behind it trembled, as if hiding a door. She flinched, quickly straightening the painting. Her heart raced. A secret room? Or just her imagination? Lena decided not to dig further. Not yet. She left the library, but unease clung to her. Over the next few days, Lena tried to keep busy. She cleaned the living room, reorganized bookshelves, even attempted cooking in the sprawling kitchen. But the mansion remained cold, and Eric remained shadow. He appeared only at dinner, sitting at the head of the table, his gaze distant. Their conversations, if any, were brief. "Are you settling in?" he asked once, his tone flat. "I'm trying," Lena replied, but he only nodded and wheeled away. Yet Lena began noticing odd things. One morning, while wiping a living room window, she glimpsed Eric in the backyard. He wasn't in his wheelchair. He stood, walking slowly, leaning on a cane. Lena blinked, thinking she'd miss him. But no, he moved smoothly, as if he'd never needed the chair. When a servant appeared, Eric sat back in the wheelchair nearby, his expression unchanged. Lena turned away, her mind swirling with suspicion. Was he pretending? But why? That night, Lena couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, listening to the wind howl through the mansion's crevices. Then another sound, a car engine. She sat up, pulling back the curtain. A black car was parked at the gate, its headlights flashing in the dark. Eric, in his wheelchair, was pushed out by Clara. He got into the car, and it vanished into the night. Lena checked the clock. 2 a.m. Where's he going at this hour? And why so secretly? The next morning, Lena tested Clara. "Does Mr. Cole often go out at night?" she asked, keeping her tone casual. The housekeeper paused her table wiping, her eyes flickering with caution. "That's not your concern," she said, turning away. Lena bit her lip, knowing she'd brushed an invisible line. But her curiosity didn't stop. One afternoon, while Eric was locked in his study, Lena wandered the third-floor hallway. She found an old wooden door, secured with a rusty padlock. Through a crack, she smelled oil paint and canvas. Lena pressed her ear to the door, but heard only silence. She walked away, unable to shake the feeling that the room held something significant. Days later, Lena discovered another room, a small storage space at the end of the second-floor hallway. Its door was unlocked, and she stepped inside, heart pounding. Dusty sheets covered large objects. Lena pulled one back, revealing a painting, a portrait of a young woman with blonde hair and haughty eyes. The work was meticulous, but a slash cut across the face. Lena gasped, quickly covering it. She looked around, uncovering more paintings, all exquisitely crafted but hidden under cloths. One caught her eye, a seascape, moonlight glinting on waves. In the corner, a signature, qu'elle. Did Eric paint these? Why hide them? As Lena left the storage room, she heard the creak of a wheelchair in the hallway. Eric appeared, his gaze icy. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice low but laced with suspicion. Lena startled, forcing calm. I was just walking," she said. Eric stared as if searching for a lie. "Don't go where you're not allowed," he said, then wheeled away. But Lena noticed something. His hands gripped the chair tightly, betraying tension. That night, Lena sat by the window, staring into the dark garden. Fragments swirled in her mind. Eric standing from his wheelchair. Late-night car trips. Locked rooms. Hidden paintings. Who was he? A destitute invalid, as the townsfolk claimed? Or a man playing a game she didn't yet understand? Lena hugged herself, feeling like she lived in a house of shadows. She knew she needed to be cautious, but her curiosity was growing. If Eric was hiding secrets, she'd uncover them. Not for him, but for herself. Early autumn sunlight slipped through the pine branches, scattering gold across the garden behind the mansion. Lena knelt on the earth, her hands streaked with mud, carefully planting a row of kale. When she first stepped into this garden, it was a neglected patch of weeds and thorns. The once vibrant rose bushes were now dry husks, as if they'd long given up hope. But Lena refused to let it waste away. She'd spent the past week clearing weeds, tilling soil, and bringing back seed packets from the town's small store. If she had to live in this cold house, she wanted at least one corner to hold her warmth. Lena wiped sweat from her brow, admiring the freshly planted rows. She smiled, feeling a rare lightness since arriving here. This garden was like her, abandoned, but capable of revival with care. She stood, brushing dirt from her jeans, and grabbed a watering can to tend the daisies she'd planted near the fence. Birds chirped in the trees, their song mingling with the breeze, easing the loneliness weighing on her heart. From a distance, Lena heard an odd noise, like something breaking. She set down the can, looking around. At the corner of the yard near the shed, she saw Eric. He was on the ground, his wheelchair tipped over, bits of wood scattered around him. Lena's heart leaped, and she ran over, pulse racing. "Are you okay?" she called, kneeling beside him. Eric grimaced, clutching his arm, but his eyes remained sharp. "I don't need help," he snapped, struggling to sit up. But Lena noticed a faint tremble in him, and a red scratch on his arm oozed blood. Ignoring his words, she gently helped him sit upright. "Don't argue," she said, firm but not harsh. "You're hurt." Eric glared as if to protest, but stayed silent. Lena checked. The scratch from her pocket. "It's not deep, thankfully," she said, keeping her voice steady. She stood, righted the wheelchair, and helped Eric into it, though he clearly disliked her touch. "I'll get bandages from the house," she said, then dashed to the kitchen. When she returned with a first aid kit, Eric was still there, his gaze fixed on the garden. Lena knelt, dressing his wound with gentle but sure motions. "Why were you out here?" she asked, trying to break the silence. Eric didn't answer right away. His eyes on the rows she'd planted. "What are you doing with the garden?" he asked, his tone flat. Lena looked up, caught off guard. "I just wanted to bring it back to life," she said. "It's beautiful, but it's been neglected too long." Eric nodded, a flicker in his eyes. Curiosity or empathy? Lena wasn't sure, but it felt like the first time he truly saw her, not just as a stranger in his home. After bandaging him, Lena stood, dusting her hands. "Try not to hurt yourself again," she said, half joking. Eric didn't reply, but the corner of his mouth twitched upward, a tiny gesture Lena nearly missed. She pushed his wheelchair back to the house, and this time, he didn't resist. That evening, Lena and Eric ate dinner together for the first time. Clara had prepared a simple meal, pumpkin soup, bread, and a salad from Lena's garden vegetables. Lena sat across from Eric at the long dining table, the old chandelier's light illuminating his face. He was still quiet, but the icy edge was gone. Lena decided to breach the wall between them. "You can hate me," she said, setting down her spoon, her voice direct. "I don't know why you wanted me here, and I don't expect you to explain, but I won't live like a ghost in this house. If we're stuck together, let's at least treat each other like people." Eric paused, his spoon hovering over the soup. He looked at her, his gaze deep, as if searching for something in her words. Lena braced for a sharp retort, or worse, silence, but he gave a slight nod. "You're right," he said, his voice low. "I don't hate you." Lena blinked, surprised by his admission. She wanted to ask more, but feared breaking this fragile moment. They ate in silence, but this time it wasn't oppressive. Lena realized something. Eric wasn't one to open up easily, but perhaps, deep down, he still craved connection. After dinner, Eric spoke unexpectedly. "The garden. You've done well," he said, almost a whisper. Lena smiled, her heart warming slightly. "Thanks," she replied. "If you'd like, I could plant more flowers. Maybe sunflowers. They'd brighten the yard." Eric looked at her, a hint of surprise in his eyes. Sunflowers, he repeated, as if the words stirred a distant memory. Do what you want. He wheeled away, leaving Lena with an odd feeling, as if she'd brushed against a door just beginning to crack open in his heart. In the days that followed, Lena kept tending the garden. She planted more daisies, sunflowers, and even tried a row of tomatoes. Each morning, she worked in the soil, feeling the earth under her hands and the sun on her face, as if the garden was giving her back some life. Eric didn't appear often, but sometimes she caught him at his study window, looking down at the garden. He said nothing, but his gaze was no longer cold. One afternoon, as Lena watered plants, she heard footsteps. Turning, she saw Clara, her eyes stern but less distant. "Miss Harper," she said, "Mr. Cole wanted you to know he appreciates your garden." Lena smiled, surprised by the message. "Thank you," she said, glancing at Eric's study window. He wasn't there, but she knew he was watching in his own way. That night, Lena lay in bed, thinking of Eric. He was a puzzle, a man cloaked in ice. But today, she'd seen a glimmer. Small, fragile, but enough to believe he wasn't entirely closed off. She wondered what had made him this way. A wound, a loss. Lena didn't know, but for the first time, she wanted to find out. Not because of the deal, but because she was starting to see him as a person, not just a husband on paper. Rain pattered against the window, cloaking the garden Lena had tended for weeks in a misty veil. Inside the mansion, the air remained cold, but Lena was growing accustomed to its quiet. She sat in the living room, reading an old book from the library, her eyes occasionally drifting to the window, where her daisies trembled under the downpour. She wondered if they'd survive the storm or wilt like her fragile hopes. Light footsteps echoed from the hallway, pulling Lena from her thoughts. She looked up to see Eric wheeling into the room. He wore a black shirt, his hair slightly tousled, his gaze no longer sharp but pensive. Lena set the book down, surprised. Eric rarely appeared during the day, except for the quiet dinners they'd recently begun sharing. "Do you like music?" he asked, his voice low but not curt. Lena blinked, unsure if she'd heard right. "Music," she echoed, then nodded. "I do, but I don't know much about it. Back home, we only had an old radio, and it broke often." She smiled, a bit shy, mentioning her impoverished past. Eric nodded, as if her answer wasn't unexpected. "There's a piano in the music room," he said. "If you'd like, I can teach you to play." The offer was so sudden that Lena froze. She searched his face for a hint of jest or reluctance, but his eyes were calm, almost sincere. "Okay," she replied, standing, "but I warn you, I'm not good at this stuff." Eric said nothing, just wheeled ahead. Lena followed, her heart beating faster for reasons she couldn't name. She didn't know why he'd suddenly share this, but she sensed a subtle shift, like a door cracking open in the wall he'd built around himself. The music room was at the end of the second-floor hallway, a place Lena had never entered. When Eric opened the door, she was struck by its beauty. Cream-colored walls, a large window overlooking the garden, and in the center, a gleaming black piano shone under the chandelier. Its ivory keys sat neatly, beckoning a melody. Lena brushed them lightly, feeling their cool touch. Eric wheeled to the piano, gesturing for her to sit. "Start with the basics," he said, playing a short tune. Simple notes, but smooth. Lena watched, trying to memorize his hand placement. She pressed a key, but the sound came out clumsy, unlike his. She laughed, embarrassed. "See? I told you." But Eric didn't seem annoyed. "Slow down," he said, patient. "Don't force it. Keep your hands relaxed." He lightly touched her wrist, adjusting her fingers. Lena started at the contact, but it wasn't rough or cold. It was gentle, almost careful. She took a breath, focusing on the keys, and this time, the sound was smoother, though still imperfect. They continued through the afternoon, rain falling outside, a soft backdrop to their work. Lena learned faster than she expected, though she made mistakes. Eric corrected her calmly, never raising his voice or showing impatience. Sometimes he played a short piece to guide her, and Lena couldn't help but marvel at his skill. His fingers glided over the keys, telling a story full of emotion she'd never seen in him otherwise. "You're picking it up quickly," he said during a break, a hint of surprise in his voice. Lena smiled, her cheeks flushing. "Maybe because I have a good teacher," she said, half teasing. Eric met her gaze, and for the first time, his eyes softened, as if the wall between them had cracked further. Over the next few days, they continued the piano lessons. Lena began to look forward to them, not just for the music, but for the rare moments when Eric wasn't the distant husband on paper. One afternoon, while struggling with a simple tune, Lena hit a wrong note, producing a jarring sound. She burst out laughing, covering her mouth. "Sorry, I ruined it." Eric looked at her, and then a miracle. He laughed, not a smirk or a faint smile, but a real laugh that lit up his face. Lena froze, her heart pounding. He's more handsome when he laughs, she thought, but didn't dare say it. "It's fine," he said, still amused. "You'll do better next time." That moment was like sunlight breaking through clouds. Lena felt a fragile connection, unspoken but real. She wanted to hold on to it, to learn more about the man before her. "When did you learn piano?" she asked softly. Eric paused, his gaze drifting to the window. She thought he wouldn't answer, but then he spoke, his voice lower. "When I was a kid, my mother taught me those were good days." He stopped as if the memory touched a wound. Lena didn't press, just nodded, waiting. Days later, during another lesson, Eric shared more. They were playing a simple duet when he paused. "I used to think the piano could save me," he said, his eyes distant. "After the accident, everything fell apart. The person I trusted most betrayed me, took everything I'd built. Music was all I had left." Lena's heart ached. She didn't ask about the accident or the betrayer. Instead, she lightly touched his hand, a small gesture of comfort. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "No one deserves that." Eric looked at her hand, as if unaccustomed to kindness. He didn't pull away, but said nothing more. From then on, the piano lessons became a space for sharing bit by bit. Lena spoke of her mother and Mia, of days working herself to exhaustion to keep her family afloat. Eric listened, sometimes nodding, sometimes asking a brief question. He didn't reveal much about himself, but Lena sensed the pain he carried, a shadow that never left. One evening, after playing a sad tune Eric taught her, Lena looked at him and said, "You know, your music is like my garden. It tells your story, even if you don't want it to." Eric frowned but didn't argue. "And what's that story?" he asked, voice low. Lena smiled, her eyes warm. "Someone who loved deeply but got hurt. But you're still here, still playing. That means you haven't given up." Eric studied her for a long moment, his gaze hinting at something unspoken. Then he nodded. "Maybe you're right," he said, and again he smiled. A faint smile, but enough to make Lena's heart stir. That night, as Lena lay in bed, she thought of Eric. He was no longer the cold husband from their wedding night. He was a man with invisible scars, and she was reaching them, little by little. She didn't know if she could heal him, but for the first time she wanted to try. Not for the deal, but because she was starting to care for him more than she dared admit. Lena stepped out of the Willow Creek General Store, carrying a bag of new seeds and some twine to build trellises for her tomato plants. The cool autumn breeze carried the scent of dry leaves and earth. She paused by the roadside, watching townsfolk pass by, her heart lighter than usual. The piano lessons with Eric, though brief, had softened her loneliness. She began to think that maybe they were inching towards something real. Not love, but at least understanding. But a familiar voice snapped her from her thoughts. "Lena Harper, isn't it?" Mrs. Grace, the bakery owner on the corner, stood outside her shop, eyes brimming with curiosity. Lena nodded, smiling politely. Mrs. Grace leaned closer, lowering her voice as if sharing a scandal. "Heard you married Eric Cole, that crippled man in the mansion on the hill. Poor thing, but do you know anything about him?" Lena frowned, unease stirring. "Know what?" she asked cautiously. Mrs. Grace glanced around, then whispered, "Folks say he was a big-shot businessman in the city, filthy rich. But his lover, a beautiful blonde, betrayed him, sold his company to a rival. After an accident, he vanished, living like a recluse now. Some say he lost everything, but I don't buy it. A man like that, who knows what he's hiding? Lena froze, her grip tightening on the bag. Businessman? Rich? Betrayal? The words swirled in her head, clashing with the Eric she knew. A cold, solitary man in a rundown mansion. She mumbled a thank you to Mrs. Grace and hurried back, her mind clouded with doubt. If the rumors were true, why had Eric hidden it from her? And if he was once wealthy, why arrange a marriage with a poor girl like her? Back at the mansion, Lena tried to act normal. She watered the garden, tidied the living room, but her thoughts kept circling Mrs. Grace's words. Eric, as usual, was locked in his study. Lena stared at the heavy wooden door at the hall's end, her pulse quickening. She'd seen him stand from his wheelchair, found expensive paintings in storage. And now this rumor. There were too many mysteries around him, and she couldn't keep pretending they didn't exist. That evening, after Clara left the kitchen to rest, Lena made a choice. She knew she was crossing a line, but curiosity and a sense of betrayal outweighed her fear. She slipped into the library where she'd once noticed a painting hiding a secret door. This time, she didn't hesitate. She pulled the painting aside, revealing a small door with a thin lock. Using a hairpin from her pocket, a trick from her hardscrabble childhood, she fiddled until the lock clicked open. Inside was a dark, cramped room, lit only by hallway light. Lena stepped in, her hands trembling as she flipped a switch. A dusty wooden desk appeared, piled with papers and documents. Her heart pounded as she scanned them. A stack bore the name qu'elle Enterprises, a company she'd never heard of, but its logo looked sleek, expensive. Beneath were stock certificates under Edward C. She didn't need to guess who that was. A folded newspaper caught her eye, its headline stark. Young tycoon Eric Cole vanishes after million-dollar company collapse. Lena skimmed it, each word a dagger. Car accident, exploité, betrayal, stolen fortune. She stepped back, hand over her mouth, stifling a gasp. It was true. Eric wasn't a destitute invalid. He was a millionaire, or had been, and he'd lied to her. But why? What was she to him? A pawn, a pastime. Lena's face burned, hurt and anger flaring within her. At dinner that night, Lena couldn't stay silent. Eric sat across from her, quietly eating soup as usual. She set her spoon down, her voice shaky but firm. Eric, you were a businessman, weren't you? She asked, eyes locked on him. Eric froze, his spoon hovering. His gaze darkened. What did you hear? He asked, voice like ice. I know the truth, Lena said, steadying herself. qu'elle Enterprises, the accident. Your ex selling out your company. You're not poor, and maybe not even disabled. Why lie to me? What's this marriage? A game to test me? Eric's hand clenched, knuckles whitening. You went through my things, he said, his voice low and cutting. You're no different from them. You just care about the money, don't you? Want to know how much I have so you can take what you can? His words hit like a slap. Lena shot to her feet, tears brimming. You think that of me? She shouted, her voice breaking. I'm here for my mother, my sister. I don't want your money, Eric. I just wanted the truth. But you treat me like a puppet, a stranger in this house. Eric opened his mouth as if to speak, but then turned away, his eyes flashing with anger and pain. Lena didn't care. She stormed from the dining room to her bedroom, slamming the door. She sank onto the bed, burying her face in her hands, tears streaming down her cheeks. She'd started to believe they could be more than a deal, that the piano lessons and his smiles were real. Now she felt foolish. He didn't trust her, and maybe he never would. In the quiet room, Lena gazed out the window, where moonlight lit her garden. It was still beautiful, but now it felt like a reminder of her naivety. She wiped her tears, vowing to be stronger. If Eric wanted to play secrets, she wouldn't let herself be manipulated anymore. She'd uncover the whole truth, not to prove anything to him, but to protect her own heart. Lena sat huddled on the wooden bench in the garden, pale moonlight glinting off the daisies folding their petals. The night was frigid, but she didn't want to return to the mansion, where, just hours ago, she and Eric had hurled words at each other like knives. She hugged herself, trying to stop the tears, but they fell silently. She thought they were growing closer, that the piano lessons and his rare smiles signaled change. Now she felt like a puppet in his game, a test of her honesty. Inside the mansion, Eric sat in his study, the desk lamp casting light on his tense features. A glass of whiskey sat untouched before him. Lena's words echoed in his mind. I don't want your money, Eric. I just wanted the truth. His knuckles whitened as he clenched his fists. He was used to betrayal, to being used, but Lena's wounded eyes, her sincerity mixed with pain, cut through him. For the first time in years, he felt he'd been wrong. He wheeled out of the room, his gaze sweeping the dim hallway. He wanted to find her, to say something, but he didn't know where to begin. Fear, the shackle that had bound him since his ex's betrayal, choked him. He'd built this wall, faked his disability, hidden his past to keep anyone from hurting him again. But Lena, she wasn't like them, and he'd pushed her away. The next morning, Lena didn't come down for breakfast. She stayed in her room, staring at the garden through the window, her heart heavy. She wondered if she should leave, despite the 6-month deal still binding her. But her mother, Mia, they needed her to see this through. She wiped her tears, summoning strength, when a knock came at the door. Clara stood there, her stern face softened. Miss Harper, she said, voice low, I need to speak with you. Lena nodded, gesturing her inside. Clara sat by the window, hands clasped tightly. You know part of Mr. Cole's story, she began, but there's more you need to understand. Lena frowned, her pulse quickening. Understand what? That he lied to me? That I'm just a piece in his test? Her voice trembled with hurt. Clara sighed, her eyes tinged with sadness. He didn't lie to hurt you, she said. After the accident, he lost everything. The woman he loved, the one he planned to marry, used their engagement to seize his company. She sold it to a rival, leaving him with nothing. He hid who he was, faked his condition, to test people's hearts. Not to wound you, but because he was afraid of being betrayed again. Lena sat stunned, as if doused with cold water. She thought of the slashed paintings in storage, Eric's distant gaze when he played the piano. It all made sense, but the truth didn't ease her pain. She stood, tears spilling. Why treat me like a test? She whispered, her voice breaking. I'm not her. I never wanted his money. I just wanted him to see me as a person. Clara rested a hand on her shoulder, a rare gesture of comfort. I know, girl, she said, but he didn't see that at first. He needed time, and I think he's starting to see who you are. She stood, leaving Lena with a storm of thoughts. Lena buried her face in her hands, sobbing, not from anger, but because she realized she cared for Eric deeply, more than she dared admit. That afternoon, Lena went to the garden, seeking peace among her vegetables and flowers. She knelt, pulling weeds, keeping her hands busy while her heart churned. Then she heard the creak of a wheelchair on the gravel path. She looked up to see Eric. He stopped a few steps away, his gaze heavy, no longer cold or angry like the night before. Lena, he called, his voice hoarse. She stood wiping her hands on her jeans, keeping her distance. What do you want? She asked, her tone guarded. Eric met her eyes, then looked down as if wrestling with himself. I owe you an explanation, he said, and an apology. Lena bit her lip, waiting. Yeah. I.C. took a deep breath, slowly but sincerely. Clara told you. I lost everything to someone I loved. I thought I'd never trust again. When you came, I assumed you were like them. I hid who I was because I was scared. Scared if you knew me? You'd choose my money, not me. Lena's heart tightened. She stepped closer, her eyes full of hurt, but also resolve. Eric, I don't need you to be a millionaire. I don't need a mansion or anything else. I just wanted you to be honest. You thought I was here for money? I'm here because my mother's sick, because my sister needs a future. But I started caring about you, really caring, and you pushed me away. Eric looked at her, his eyes raw with regret. I was wrong, he said, his voice trembling. I didn't mean to hurt you. I just didn't know how to trust again. He reached out as if to touch her, but hesitated, fearing rejection. That morning, Lena woke with an odd feeling. Sunlight streamed through the curtains, illuminating the garden now vibrant with daisies and sunflowers. But an unnamed unease stirred within her. Since their kiss in the garden, her relationship with Eric had shifted. They were no longer strangers bound by a deal. Piano lessons continued. Dinners grew warmer with small stories, and Eric's gaze now held tenderness. But today, he wasn't at the mansion. Lena asked Clara, but the housekeeper only said, Mr. Cole had business outside. He'll be back soon. Lena nodded, trying to shake her worry. She went to the garden, watering plants and pulling weeds, but her mind stayed on Eric. She knew he often left at night, but this was midday, and he told her nothing. She told herself he had a right to his secrets, but after all they'd been through, his silence unsettled her. By afternoon, as Lena reorganized books in the library, the phone rang in the living room. She rushed down to find Clara holding the receiver, her face pale. Miss Harper, she called, voice trembling. It's Mr. Cole. He's had an accident. Lena felt the blood drain from her face. Accident? Where? How is he? She demanded, hands shaking so much she nearly dropped the book she held. Clara shook her head. A landslide in the mountains. He was helping locals with a project. They've taken him to the hospital. Lena didn't wait for more. She ran upstairs, grabbed her coat, and shouted, Take me there now. The drive to the hospital was a nightmare. Lena sat in the back, gripping the seat, staring out the window. Clara explained that Eric had been secretly funding a charity project in the mountains, building bridges, repairing schools for poor children, but didn't want anyone, even Lena, to know. He didn't want you to think he was doing it to impress you, Clara said. Lena bit her lip, tears falling silently. She didn't care what he did or why. She just wanted him safe. At the hospital, Lena rushed to the ER, heart pounding. A doctor stopped her, saying Eric was in surgery for broken bones and a head injury. We're doing our best, he said, but his tone offered little comfort. Lena collapsed into a hallway chair, burying her face in her hands, praying silently. She realized she loved him, not the wealthy or mysterious man, but Eric, who taught her piano, laughed with her in the garden, feared opening his heart, but tried for her. For days, Lena barely left the hospital. She sat by Eric's bed, holding his hand, though he remained unconscious. She changed his bandages, wiped sweat from his brow, and whispered about the garden, the piano melodies they played. You have to wake up? Eric, she said, voice choked. I haven't told you I love you. Nurses looked at her with pity, but Lena didn't care. She just wanted him to open his eyes even once. On the third night, Lena dozed by his bed, head resting on his hand. She jolted awake when his fingers twitched. She looked up to see Eric's eyes open, tired but clear. Lena, he whispered, voice faint. Lena sobbed, clutching his hand, tears falling onto his knuckles. You're awake, she said, voice breaking. I was so scared I'd lose you. Eric managed a weak smile, his face still pale. I'm tougher than you think, he said, voice hoarse. Lena laughed through her tears, brushing his hair back. Don't scare me like this again, she said, then told him about her days here, how she'd prayed for him. As Eric grew stronger, he held her hand, his gaze serious. Lena, he said, voice low but steady. I need to say this before it's too late. Lena looked at him, heart racing. He took a deep breath, continuing. Our marriage started as a deal, my mistake. I tested you, pushed you away because I was afraid, but you changed everything. You made me want to trust again, to live again. Lena bit her lip, tears falling anew. Eric, she whispered, but he gestured for silence. He squeezed her hand, eyes never leaving hers. You can leave when the 6 months are up, he said, voice trembling. I won't hold you back, but I need you to know I can't stop loving you. Lena, marry me again, not for a deal, not for money, but because I love you. Lena froze, her heart seeming to stop. She looked into his eyes, seeing a raw sincerity he'd never shown before. Sobbing, she leaned down, kissing his forehead, then whispered, I love you too, Eric. I'll marry you, not again, but for the first time, truly. Eric pulled her close, holding her tightly despite his weakness. They sat there in the cold hospital room, but their warmth made everything gentle. Lena rested against his shoulder, feeling his heartbeat, knowing that no matter how painful the past, they'd found each other, not through fate, but through love. The early morning sun spilled gold over the garden behind the mansion, where daisies, sunflowers, and climbing roses bloomed in a riot of color. Lena stood in the yard, holding a bundle of freshly cut vines, her eyes sparkling with joy. Today was her wedding day, not a cold contract in an empty church, but a true wedding where she and Eric would vow their love. She'd spent the past week transforming the garden into a space that breathed with their essence. Strings of lanterns hung from tree branches, a rustic wooden table draped in white linen, and a path scattered with petals she prepared herself. Lena wore a simple wedding dress, a far cry from the borrowed one before. Nancy had sewn it specially, soft white silk that hugged her figure, adorned with delicate hand-embroidered flowers. She looked at herself in the bedroom mirror, smiling. This time she didn't feel like a lamb led to slaughter. She was a bride, ready to step into a future with the man she loved. In the garden, laughter and chatter filled the air. Gone were the pitying glances and whispers of Willow Creek's townsfolk. This time, Lena's closest loved ones were there. Her mother Ellen, now stronger thanks to treatment, sat beaming. Mia, her sister, in a pale pink dress, darted around helping Lena arrange flowers. Nancy, Grace, and a few other townsfolk came too, bringing cakes and heartfelt blessings. The atmosphere brimmed with kinship, simple but warm. Eric stood at the head of the petal-strewn path, no wheelchair in sight. He wore a gray suit, hair neatly combed, his eyes lighting up as Lena stepped out from the mansion. Days earlier, he'd revealed the truth to the town at a public meeting. Before dozens of curious eyes, he spoke of his past, Coal Enterprises, the betrayal, and why he'd lived in hiding. I was afraid, he'd said, voice steady, but I found someone who made me want to live as myself. Lena, standing beside him then, had held his hand, feeling his courage as he faced his history. Now, as Lena reached him, Eric took her hand, his eyes brimming with emotion. "You're beautiful," he whispered, making her blush. She smiled, squeezing his hand. "You're not so bad yourself," she teased. Soft laughter rippled from those around them, easing the solemnity. The pastor who'd officiated their first wedding now stood before them with a warm smile. Today, he said, "We don't just witness vows, but the start of a new journey built on love and trust." Lena and Eric locked eyes, the world fading to just them. They spoke their vows, not dry words from contract, but words from the heart. "Lena," Eric began, voice trembling, "you showed me love isn't something to fear. You're my light, and I promise to spend my life loving and protecting you." Tears glistened in Lena's eyes, but she smiled, replying, "Eric, you taught me even the deepest wounds can heal. I promise to stand by you, not just today, but forever." As they exchanged rings, simple silver bands engraved with each other's names, applause erupted. Eric leaned down, kissing her, a kiss gentle but profound, sealing their bond. Lena held him, hearing his heartbeat, knowing this was where she belonged forever. After the ceremony, everyone gathered around the wooden table, enjoying cakes, hot soup, and lively stories. Mia ran to hug Lena, whispering, "You're the prettiest bride." Ellen took Eric's hand, voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for giving my girl a home." Eric smiled warmly. "No, ma'am," he said. "Lena gave me a home." The next day, Eric kept another promise. He announced plans to fund a school for poor children in the mountains, where he'd once secretly helped. Willow Creek's townsfolk, initially shocked by his true identity, now regarded him with respect. Eric was no longer the reclusive invalid of rumors. He was a man ready to give back, and Lena stood proudly beside him, watching him reclaim his light. Lena, unwilling to merely stand in his shadow, started her own project. She turned an empty mansion room into a free art class for the town's children. She taught them to paint, mold clay, and tell stories through color. Kids from poor families, like hers once was, came with curious eyes and left with bright smiles. Mia was her first student, quickly becoming Lena's trusty assistant, preparing paints and cleaning brushes. One afternoon, as class ended, Lena stood in the garden, watching children run around with wet paintings in hand. Eric approached, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "Teacher Harper looks happy," he teased. Lena turned, leaning in his chest, smiling. "Because I have reasons to be," she said. "You, the garden, the kids. I never thought I could have all this." Eric kissed her forehead, eyes shining. "And I never thought I deserved you," he whispered. They stood there in the sunset, gazing at the garden, now a symbol of their love and healing. Lena knew life ahead wouldn't always be easy, but with Eric by her side, she was ready for any challenge. Rain began to fall as the sunset faded, its droplets glimmering like tiny jewels on the garden behind the mansion. Lena stood on the porch, watching the daisies and sunflowers quiver under the shower. She wore a thin sweater, her dark brown hair loose, her eyes reflecting a peace she never thought she'd find. Months ago, this garden was a barren patch, and she was a girl forced into a loveless marriage. Now everything had changed, not just the garden, but her heart. Soft footsteps sounded behind her. Lena turned to see Eric at the threshold. He wore a white shirt, sleeves rolled up, his gaze tender as it met hers. Since their garden wedding, they'd become inseparable. Eric was no longer the cold man hiding behind a wheelchair. He was her husband, who'd opened his heart and given her his world. "The rain's beautiful," he said, voice warm, "but you'll get wet standing there." Lena smiled, stepping off the porch, letting the rain graze her face. "I like the rain," she said, tilting her head skyward. "It reminds me of when I was a kid, when Mia and I played outside until Mom yelled at us." Eric joined her, no cane or wheelchair needed. He stood close, his warmth cutting through the rain's chill. "You make me remember how simple life can be," Eric said, eyes shining. "Before you, I thought I'd live in darkness forever." Lena took his hand, fingers intertwining tightly. "And you showed me even the worst days can lead to something beautiful," she replied softly. They stood in the rain, silent for a moment. Lena leaned against his shoulder, letting the water soak her clothes, unbothered. She thought of their journey, from the cold church wedding, lonely days in the mansion, to piano lessons, their tearful first kiss, and the vibrant garden ceremony. They'd started as strangers, bound by a harsh deal, but now they were soulmates, united by love. "You know," Lena said, voice catching, "I once thought this marriage was a punishment. I was scared, thought I'd lost myself by agreeing to it." She paused, meeting his eyes, where moonlight reflected like a sea of stars. "But now I know it was fate." Eric smiled, pulling her close, holding her tightly. The rain fell harder, drenching them, but they didn't part. "If you're fate," he whispered, lips brushing her hair, "I'll never let you go." Lena looked up, rain streaking her cheeks, mingling with her smile. She stood on her toes, kissing him, a sweet, fierce kiss, as if sealing their vow into the storm. They parted, but Eric kept her hand, eyes locked on hers. "Come with me," he said, voice thick with emotion. Lena nodded, letting him lead her from the porch into the rain. Hand in hand, they strolled the gravel path through a garden made for weddings. Rain blurred everything, but the mansion's golden lights glowed behind them, wrapping them in warmth. Lena laughed as Eric spun her gently, as if dancing to an unheard melody. "You're crazy," she said, voice bright, wet hair clinging to her face. Eric laughed, the sound ringing through the rain. "Maybe," he replied, "but you make me want to be crazier." They paused under a tall pine, where the rain fell lighter. Eric drew her close again, their foreheads touching. "Thank you, Lena," he said, voice hoarse, "for not giving up on me." Lena brushed his cheek, feeling the sincerity in his words. "Thank you," she whispered, "for giving me a home. Not just for me, but for Mom and Mia." She thought of her mother, now healthy and living with Mia in a small house nearby, of her art classes, where children brought laughter daily. It had started with a desperate choice, but had become a happiness she'd never dared dream of. They walked on, hand in hand, past the vegetables and flowers Lena had nurtured. Rain made them glisten, as if the garden blessed them too. Lena told him about a painting she was teaching the kids, a field of flowers under moonlight. "I want to hang it in the classroom," she said, eyes alight. Eric nodded, pride in his gaze. "I want to see it," he said, "and I want to help you expand the classes if you'd like." Lena stopped, looking at him. "Really?" she asked, surprised. Eric smiled, squeezing her hand. "Really? I used to think money was all I had, but you showed me what it can do when used right. I want us to build something together, for the kids, the town, for us." Lena's heart warmed. She hugged him, their wet clothes clinging together, but she felt only joy. "We'll do it," she said firmly, together. Eric kissed her hair, whispering, "Together." When they returned to the porch, both were soaked, but their smiles never faded. Lena looked back at the garden, where the mansion's lights created a fairy tale scene. She held Eric's hand, feeling the silver ring on her finger, no longer loose but perfectly fitted, as if made for her. "Are you cold?" she teased. Eric shook his head, pulling her close. "Not with you here," he said, eyes gleaming. They stood on the porch, watching the rain, the garden sparkling, the mansion aglow behind them. Lena leaned against his chest, hearing his steady heartbeat, knowing this was the ending she dreamed of. Not a perfect fairy tale, but a real story, written from pain, healing, and love. Eric kissed the top of her head, whispering once more, "I'll never let you go."